Okay, recording this has been an ordeal, so let's just hope for the best. Hey yo, if you follow Bloodspine, you might have noticed that there's been a minor art shift. Not as drastic as the change from the pilot, but there is a difference. Faces are more consistent, hair follicles are more complex, and everybody's pecs are just a little bit juicier. This is because over the holidays I got my hands on Mod Mesh while it was on sale. Then I used it to make new segmented bases, as well as a lot of pre-made hair assets. Now, making a base model will have to be its own tutorial, and I don't know how to handle the hair part. So for now, I just want to go over the process for making these new character models, as they sped things up even further than before. Also, hoping to make up for the janky talking from last time, sampled myself and some public domain voices for a less mumbly voice changer, and hopefully that makes me speak clearer. So for reference, we'll be making my JoJo's Bizarre Adventure OC, Logan, since, well, that project is still a little far away. He was still good practice due to his design since, well, it's JoJo. If your outfit isn't weird, you're not really a stand user. We start by gathering objects. This includes the pre-made curves that will be used for his hair, a small sphere that we'll make into pearls strung around his body, and a heart sheath from the base mesh that I modified into a spade for his hairpin and earrings. I start by positioning the hair around the scalp for the big side bangs. Because these are curves, I can still modify them to fit certain shapes before messifying them. I then duplicate and rotate the clone hairs around, and move their points to make a cohesive shape. What you want to make sure is for this to come across in all angles. Something you'll see is me constantly coming back to these to make sure the silhouette is well-rounded. For Logan, as an example, while I don't want these bangs to be short, I don't want them fully covering his eye like an emo cut, so I make sure his eyes are visible in at least most angles. This will especially be necessary once we get to the 2D portion. Lastly, once I like the general setup, I convert it all to mesh and sculpt further to fine-tune the shape. This can take some trial and error as you try getting the silhouette just right. Just keep trying until you get a good feel. We then do the same process with the back hair using a different set of curves. Thankfully, because Logan's hair is short, we don't need to worry about whether or not it covers the back of his head. That might need to be a different video. Moving on, I take the spheres and use them for the other half of his hair since he is half black, and spheres are better for conveying that type of curly hair in a simpler art style. It's also the easiest to arrange since you just have to move balls around. After that, since they're also coned back, I just sculpt some protruding rows to emulate slicked back hair. Once again, no need to be too complex unless there's certain detail you'd like to convey like a cornrows. Lastly, we join the back hair to the head since the division in the inner silhouette is generally either one line like the scalp or one prop like a crown or headband. The front hair stays separate so it can properly block out the head in 2D mode. Going off of that, if something looks off, the best solution I found is just cloning bits of hair and making that fill the gap of space. We're not rendering these in real time, so you can afford some extra hair polygons. After a few extra details on the hair, we get to the slightly easier part of sculpting this boy. The props. First, I just shrunk some of the spades and hovered them by Logan's ears to make earrings. Only difficulty was lining it just right by his lobes. The hardest of these was getting the hairpin to look nice in every angle. Doesn't look perfect by the end, but it's not too much work to draw it out. After some more cleanup on the head silhouette, I get to Logan's fur collar. Thankfully, since the shape is a bit more vague, I can think less and just clump up hair and arrange it around. Kinda like the ball hair, but for the spiky curves. Once I get a nice wrap around, I make adjustments as needed, mainly bits of asymmetry for realism. After that came the beads. I mainly just arranged them in this helix pattern because it was cool. But the mix of shapes did also give it a nice sensuality that I wasn't expecting. Same for the bead choker, waistband, and the shirt collar. Indeed, this version of Lobo did become the most press fest worthy. Lastly, I just had to do the shoes. Did have to sculpt, but all I did for this was set up two subdivide surface modifiers, making sure to have the one on top set to Simple and the lower one set to Cadmiel Clark. From there, I can precisely change the shape in edit mode. I recommend watching this tutorial by Blender Secrets for the nitty-gritty on how each tool is affected. After that comes the rigging and weight painting. This was mostly easy given the segmented nature of the parts. Just had to set the weight on entire objects to 1. Even cases where I did need to gradient, the shoe tongues just needed to a little dab on top to move along with the foreleg. And for color, I just needed to do a few radial gradients for the neck, pecs, and biceps. The only beads I really needed to gradient were the forelegs towards the bottom to accommodate the foot, and the ones on Logan's butt. Needed to make sure they didn't clip too deep into his cheeks anytime the thigh bent. With the model ready, we shipped to a 2D file and began posing him. As usual for these cases, make sure to account for perspective and exaggeration that 3D would ignore. And for this new case, also make sure there is as little clipping as possible. You're still going to get some extra or missing lines, but it should be significantly less than before. Finally, we get to the line art modifier. Your mileage will vary, but the important part is to have the create dropdown set to individual silhouette. Uncheck crease threshold and uncheck intersection. Now Blender is only accounting for the individual shapes that make up the segmented base. And since we turned off intersection, parts can be rotated however you need without needing to adhere to the connection, since the wonky geometry won't show. This means you can pose characters however you want without worrying about the mesh's topology getting stretch marks that you then need to remove. Worst case scenario, removing extra lines should be brought down from 5 to 10 minutes of cleanup, give or take the model complexity, to around 1 to 2 minutes. Bonus points with this model. I also made a base for the eyes, so they can never be too lopsided, close, or far apart ever again. They are always on the right spot. We then just subdivide everything. Adjust the thickness, apply, then add the noise modifier for some natural light weighting. Then we sculpt around any changes, like removing unwanted edges or now giving the eyes expression. Once that's covered, I sketch in the missing details to add. Closing gaps, facial details, the hairline, textures, that kind of stuff. Then we just draw our own line art. I did consider adding some of that Araki-style cross-hatching, but it never looks right in my color style. Might find a nice balance when Lobo's story is in proper production, but for now his skid will be clear. Coloring is pretty straightforward since we made sure to close most of the gaps, meaning the fill tool will just automatically fill the whole thing, with the occasional ignoring small spots. But for that we just color over them with the pen tool. On the red layer, we draw little shapes of how we want the shading to wrap around the character, similar to how they do it in actual anime productions. Then, on the shade layer, we just color in the darker tones for each color. Finally, for the shine, I like to use a paintbrush for a more tangible feel. Then I add some point lights for some controllable gradients, and change the viewport display color to a base shade to contrast the lights with. After some fixes and running by the glow filter and putting it on Metabang to set the colors to print mode, we have the finished piece. So yeah, that's a rundown for the new process for my work. If you like what you saw, I'd appreciate the usual like, comment, subscribe. You can also join the Studio Lazarine Patreon for early access to comics, special animations, and work-in-progress material, plus shoutouts in any project I do. If you want, I also have an ongoing BL webtoon, Bloodspine, a cyberpunk fantasy story about boys in armor fighting aliens. Think something like a sci-fi version of Saint Seiya. But, you know, just a little bit gayer. We're still trying to reach 100 followers on Tapas, and any support helps. You can also support the comic by reading the Fables X version, with less censors and I gain a portion of ad revenue. It's a win-win. But yeah, I'll be signing out for now. As always, enjoy the show.